Gameweek 3 is out of the way. We've made it to an international break. And also transfer windows closed now, so all the squads are finalized. We've got all the price reveals of all the players. We've also got a new gem in the game with Cristiano Ronaldo coming in at the last minute. So though it's a good player to come in, but also a bit of a headache because so many people wildcarding out there, so many people losing their minds over Cristiano Ronaldo, and I suppose rightfully so. Greg, what do you make of all of this?
How you doing, Clyde? Wow, what a transfer window.
I agree with you. It was a crazy transfer window. I think it was the best transfer window ever. High-profile players, Messi, Ramos, all of these guys just... And then Ronaldo decided, oh, well, you know what, I don't want to be left out over here. I'll just go back to Manchester United and break the internet again.
I think I could hear the sound of wildcard buttons being pressed as that transfer happened. But it's brilliant for the Premier League. It's going to be so interesting for FPL. Suddenly, we've got this premium player problem that everyone's going to, how do we fit all these premiums into our team? Where at the beginning of the season, it was looking like, it was Salah and Fernandes. Those are the two guys. Maybe Kane. Was Kane going to go to City? Didn't go to City. No one's really picking him. So there were no premium options that you had to worry about. And then suddenly Ronaldo's thrown into the mix, and everyone's rushing to bring him into their teams.
And Lukaku just before that as well.
Yes, Lukaku, yeah.
Yeah, and it makes me think that how quickly things change. I mean, we spoke about this in preseason as well, where 3 game weeks is so much, and we didn't know about Lukaku then when we did that episode. We didn't know about Ronaldo, obviously. And we were talking about the fact that, if someone like Kane went to City, it will be like almost he'll be nailed on in your team. And now, well, that didn't happen and doesn't rule him out of contention either. But, I do wonder how people's reaction would have been if, let's say, Kane was at City at the moment, and you had Lukaku at Chelsea, and you had Ronaldo at Manchester United, where the psychology around it, where if people would have still decided, okay, you know what, I want Ronaldo in my team, or at the same price decide, okay, you know what, at City with the amount of chances they created, whether it's just worth going for Kane. But I suppose now it's no point talking about hypotheticals over here.
I mean, that would have been crazy. I think everyone would have been trying to fit 3 or 4 premiums into the. I mean, you can't forget Salah as well, who's just the most consistent performer.
He's the banker,
yeah. So I mean, now you're trying to fit 4 premiums into your side. I think everyone would have had Ronaldo, Lukaku, Kane, Salah, and then 4.0 everyone else. Like, it would have been an absolute nightmare.
Yeah, I made a joke and I tweeted up a team like that. When was it, yesterday or whatever it is, or the day before? And then some people took the bait and fell for it, and it'd be like, no playing goalkeeper. I was like, no, look. But yeah, I think it has been a great addition to the game. And what I like most about it is the fact that you're really going to have to manage your squad well and rotate through the premiums. It's not just a case of set and forget. And I think what I like most about that is the fact that because there's so many options, it might dilute captaincy a little bit as well, which means captaincy will become more into play. Like we saw in Game Week 3, for example, where for the first game week this season, all of a sudden you had Mikel Antonio being heavily captained. Bruno was quite heavily captained, and he was the only one, I think, out of the top 4 captains who blanked. And then Salah, got the penalty, and Son got a goal against Watford, and he was my captain. And just looking at that, it made the game so much more exciting to have this variety of captains. And I think with so many more premiums in the game now to consider, I think that for me is the biggest takeaway from it all.
Yeah, it becomes, you really have to plan your team, and there has to be some sort of rotation of premiums. You can't just put the premiums in and bank on them, because you need to plan. When you need to look at the fixtures and see when are those premiums playing the weakest teams, and which are the best premiums to have in my squad. Because if you just put a banker in and put Kane or put Ronaldo or Lukaku in, and the fixtures are bad, there are going to be other premiums scoring way more points against the weaker teams. And I think that's the key thing now with all these brilliant premium options. You really need to be looking at the fixtures and planning your team and being able to make those changes where you need to.
Yeah, exactly. And it also raises the other question, and I mean, we've spoken about this during the preseason, during the first episode when, building the Game Week 1 team. And it comes back to it now, is that the trap that people will fall in is to end up diluting other parts of their teams, trying to put in too many premiums. And I still feel personally that 2 premiums is enough. I think I spoke about it, was it in last week's episode, where I said I'm not happy with the fact that I have 3 premiums. I mean, I'm happy that I have 3 premiums in it. Everybody's happy when they have premiums, but it's ultimately left me 1 attacker short. I have 6 attackers, and that 7th attacker cost me about 20 points because I would have.
The problem comes when those premiums blank, and you need that squad depth and when you go 3 premiums, that's exactly what you're left with. And we saw that in this game week, where the teams that were heavily had too many premiums in them, didn't have enough depth, and when Bruno blanked, suddenly you're in a lot of trouble because you don't have that depth elsewhere in your squad. And I think that's going to come down to it again, as going forward. I don't think that you can realistically have a good depth of squad if you've got more than 2 premiums. So I think, and in fact, in the next few game weeks, you might be left with only 1 premium, and just having to look at sort of balancing your squad until maybe the fixtures turn, or if you're bringing Ronaldo in now, then maybe you're going to have 2. But I think the real key is going to be what happens between now and Game Week 7, because Game Week 7 is going to be the key turning point. That's when Chelsea's fixtures become sort of irresistible. If you don't have Chelsea players coming in Game Week 7 and you're not planning to bring any in, I think you need to relook at your squad very carefully, because Lukaku, there's Mount, there's James in defense. These guys are going to start scoring massive points from Game Week 7 onwards.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I remember looking at certain people, on Twitter and so on, talking about playing their wild card in Game Week 7 even before the season started. So yeah, I think that's going to be a pivotal time of the season. It actually reminds me of last season, when around Game Week 31 or whatever it is, when there was this massive fixture swing and then everybody played their wild cards to get them towards the ending of the season. So yeah, it's definitely going to be an interesting one. And like personally, I've talked myself in and out of possibly playing my wild card. At the moment, I'm not too keen. Even though I'm that attacker short, I think a -4 would probably be enough to get in that 1 extra player that I need in attack. But apart from that, I don't think it's necessary for me to go and play my wild card right now.
That wild card is so valuable, and if you look at your team and you see that there aren't 5-6 changes that you desperately need to make, then it really, if you can sort of navigate your way through the next few weeks and make the changes that you need to, then I really think banking the wild card for later on in the first half of the season is going to be incredibly valuable. You've always got to think, if I use my wild card now, how many points am I gaining versus how many points am I giving up later? And certainly for my team, I'm going to do my best to try and keep that in my pockets. And it's going to come down to a few things. There are always these uncertainties that come from week to week. For me, it's Wilson's flagged. Is he going to be able to play? Against United. I don't want to have a case where my bench, as we spoke about in preseason, my bench at the moment is very, very scarce.
I think that goes for most of us. I think we have nothing on there. Yeah.
So I don't have bench options. So for me, I need a guy like Wilson to be playing, even if it's against a tough fixture like United, because the week after he's got a much better fixture. And if a guy like if he's injured and there's some other issues that pop up, it starts to become a little bit more difficult. But ideally, I want to keep that wild card in my back pocket, see what happens, See how Ronaldo fits in this United side. Does Greenwood continue to play? I have a feeling that he will, while Rashford's still injured.
I think he's too good not to play at the moment.
He's had such an amazing start, and I think he's definitely a favourite in the squad for the manager. I think if Rashford's injured, I think Greenwood's spot should be nailed on, and if I see that, then maybe I feel like I've almost got a bit of cover with Greenwood in the team and not having Ronaldo. But if Greenwood's not in the team, if Wilson's not playing, there might be issues with. They're talking about now instituting a ban against the players that weren't released for the international break, and his name came up on Twitter today, which also just more nightmares from our squad. But if all goes to plan, I'm going to keep that wild card and hopefully not even use it up past game week 7, because I've got a plan to get those Chelsea players in.
Yeah.
So that would be first prize. But like we said, things change so quickly. Injuries happen, and you just got to if your squad gets the points.
A typical example of Reece James picking up a red card, and then you think, oh, okay, now he'll only be back on like the 19th of September or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes you've got to see what's happening with your squad, and if you're in a real pickle, or there's some real big changes that you need to make just because of fixture swings, then sure, clicking the button makes sense. But I'm hoping that I can keep that in my back pocket for the moment.
Yeah, and look, I agree with you regarding just holding that wild card just for as long as possible, because also there are a few players coming back from isolation as well, and it will be interesting to see when those players come back, first of all, how many games are they missing? I think Emi Martinez or Buendia, they're missing 1 game, if I'm not mistaken.
I know Martinez is definitely out. But I'm not sure on Buendia, and he just scored a goal as well. Finally got a return in the last game week. So he's starting to come through. So that's quite frustrating. If he misses the next game.
Yeah, and there's also an international break. When is it? At the beginning of November or ending October, beginning November, around there. And I think there's about another 3 or 4 more game weeks, and then it's another international break. And because of that over there, I think it'll be worth as well. Just if you can get through all of this and just keep your wild card intact, I think and then you'll also know isolation rules, injuries, whatever. We can decide from there.
Yeah, I think it also, when you click that wildcard button, you want to have as much data as you can to analyze. And at the moment, we're sitting with 3 weeks of expected data. And we've got last season, but it's quite difficult to see exactly, to sort of sift through the noise of it. And the more data you have, the more informed decisions you can make. And such a key thing, choosing that wildcard team. I've had a terrible record when it comes to wildcards. Almost every case where I've clicked the wildcard button, if I'd left my team exactly like it was, it would have scored more points. So it's always quite
so
frustrating.
Amazing how that happens. Like, you call it the curse of the wild card if you want to, but it's like your team will be fine. You wild card, and then you'll have the shocking week where you score like 40 points or whatever it is, and you think like, why did I do this? And and also I think a lot of times when we play the wild card, we also end up upsetting the balance of our team as well. And when I'm looking at just some numbers as well, like and I suppose I'm agreeing with you when you say you cut out the noise with the bigger sample size. Chelsea's expected goals conceded is 3.43 at the moment, right? They've only conceded the 1 goal, which was the penalty, and so they if you're looking at the delta values, like that's still brilliant, okay? But just looking at that alone, that expected goals conceded number is inflated just by Liverpool bombarding Chelsea in the second half. There's nothing else. If you had to take out, now I know that stats doesn't necessarily work that way, But if you look at that second half of Liverpool playing Chelsea with the 10 men, that was the anomaly in the data set over here. That was the outlier. If you look at every other half of football that was played from game week 1 and the whole of the first half against Liverpool, the XGC is probably less than 1 goal or something like that over there. And I think that is the importance of making sure that, of just staying patient and trying to stay in the game for as long as possible. Because especially around game week 10, 11, 12, you'll have enough data to be able to work with where it's, the noise starts to get cut out, the outliers start to get cut out, and you see a more reflective picture of what the stats are actually telling you.
Yeah, that's the problem. Is at the moment you don't know what player is a bandwagon and is just going to fade into the distance, and which player is actually going to be one of those, the Mahrez from a couple seasons or a few years ago, where he was just, when Leicester won the title, he was just the player to have, and it's very difficult at this point to know, is someone going to be, that player? Is Ben Rama going to be the guy that everyone has to have? Is Gray from Everton, who's popped up and looks a really good option in sort of the 5.5 million range? These guys, you just don't know at this point whether it's just a shot in the dark or whether they're actually going to have consistent returns. And the problem is that you don't want to miss out on a Mahrez, a Lingard, these guys that are just post these incredible numbers consistently, but at the same time you don't want to jump on these bandwagons and be stuck with these players that you eventually have to give up on because they just aren't scoring points for you. And the one thing that stopped me from bringing Ben Rama, for instance, into my team, from the get-go after he had such a good game week 1, was firstly because I already have West Ham cover in Antonio, and I don't like to double up where possible. But secondly, his XG numbers weren't great. His delta was through the roof. He was performing way above his XG numbers, and there were actually a few West Ham players in the team that were outperforming him from an expected point of view. And that sort of led me to think, okay, I'm going to hold back and I'm going to wait and see. And sometimes, one thing you mustn't be worried about is a cheap player especially, rising even up to 0.5 in value, and giving it that 6 or 7 games to actually really see if they're a consistent performer. Yeah, because you can still bring them in. Don't worry too much about it.
7 million for a player like Ben Rama, if he's firing, it's really 7 million is nothing in the game, right? And if you look at even somebody like Rafinha right now, I took a chance on him from game week 1 and decided, okay, at 6.5, I felt he's so cheap that even though his fixtures are a little bit difficult, I'll just keep him for the alternating fixtures where I feel that he can get it. And he did get 1 return at least, right? But I suppose, okay, maybe it wasn't the best decision because there were other players who outperformed him. But again, even at 7 million, bringing in a player like Rafinha is not an issue. So I fully agree with you there. It basically goes back to someone like Bamford from last season as well, where he started the game off at 5.5. He ended up 7 million or whatever it was.
Yeah, it was something crazy. Yeah.
And in reality, let's be honest, with that type of returns, you'd even pay 7.5. This season 8 million. I still think he's a great value option. So,
he's still bringing the stats, and that's the thing. Bamford at the moment is, from an XG point or XGI point of view, is the top Leeds performer, and at 8 million, he ranks. I think at the moment he's 18th out of in the entire league in terms of expected points. So at 8 million, it's still a good price. And if he's, you must remember that they've had, like you said, quite difficult fixtures. Their fixtures start to turn quite considerably from game week 5. And if I was wildcarding, I think Bamford would be even at 8 million would be a player that I would be strongly considering.
Yeah, no, definitely 7.9 now. So if you've got an extra 1.1 million, then that's great. But looking at the numbers over here, Bamford is the 5th highest in terms of XGI. So his goal involvement is 1.63 per game, And I mean, just looking at that as well, his XG numbers don't look. His XG numbers are actually as well. He's fifth for XG at 1.46. He's only scored one at the moment, but again, tough opposition. So you can imagine that. 1.46. He scored one goal, probably par for the course. But I think from these numbers are highly encouraging from game week 5 onwards.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, they're really. I mean, looking at the data, that's really what you have to look at. If you're wildcarding and you are forced to wildcard now or look to wildcard next week, it's looking at this data and seeing who are the guys that you can still use last season's data and have a feel for the guys that are going to perform. Antonio was ninth last season on my ranking system. Calvert-Lewin was 19th. Mane was 7th. Mahrez was in the top 35. Salah was first. Torres was 23rd. So these guys that are performing at a very high level in the first 3 game weeks, there are a lot of them that have proven track records. And for me, when we talk about small sample sizes and noise, if a guy's got a proven track record from last season, then I'm going to be trusting that a little bit more. The names that I'm starting to worry about are, a guy like Traore has incredible stats at the moment, but he's got a 0% conversion rate. And last season was the same. And so you think, okay, well, now they're playing much weaker opposition. Then there's been a lot of talk about people bringing Traore into their wildcard teams. You need to see some sort of conversion happening there. And you probably get 6 million going to take a bit of a punt and put him in just based on his stats because the fixtures are so good. But you have to be careful that conversion actually comes through and that those stats stay up.
Exactly. And I remember early last season, Harvey Barnes in the first 2, 3, 4 games. I remember Barnes had the highest number of shots in the box, but he had 0 return. I think he had like 1 goal out of those 5. And it was like 3 or 4 games or whatever it was. And it's one of those situations as well. Look, to be fair, Harvey Barnes did start playing better. Was it around mid-season or whatever it was? I can't remember exactly.
He got just before he got injured. I think he really started to.
Yeah, so it was.
Play well.
It could have been around game week 17, 18, 19, around there, where he really started to just really convert. Yeah, like you said, the numbers started to convert into actuals. Whereas like with at the moment, like there's certain players I'm looking at and I'm just not confident of getting them. But whereas like if I look at a Calvert-Lewin, he's got his XG is high as 3.13 and he scored 3 goals. Antonio 2.91, he scored 4 goals. And then the third is Wilson 1.95 and he scored 2. And any one of those players, I'm fairly confident that if I take them and put him in the team, the fixtures might not always be great, but I'll be confident enough that they will return at some point in time.
Yeah, the guys who really performed over a big sample size, you can put your trust in. And I guess the key to FPL comes to being able to pick the new players and the up and coming players and the guys that are season wonders as early as possible. But there's always that balance between picking them too soon and picking them too late, and trying to time it is very, very difficult. And sometimes the stats help you there, and sometimes you've just got to go with a bit of gut feel and a bit of the eye test when you're watching the games. But it's if you're wildcarding now, it's a tough decision because you've got quite a few fixture swings coming up. You've got, I think, a bit of a fixture swing in game week 5 for the Leeds teams. For Leeds and for Leicester. I think you've got United their fixtures start to decline a bit from game week 5. And then you've got Chelsea from game week 7 who are just irresistible. And then, we all spoke about the Arsenal game week 4 fixture swing, but I don't think anyone's even considering that at the moment based on their team and the way they're playing. So, 3 weeks and so much has changed from our preseason chats already, like you said.
Yeah, I just, when was it? After we recorded the last episode, and I was busy on Twitter and I commented on one of the threads and said, look, you know what? I've just transferred White out for Dyer because, well, I needed somebody to actually play, right?
Yes.
And somebody replied to me and said, look, you know what? But what's the reason behind it? Because Ben White has such good fixtures, and it comes down to this thing of saying, look, you know what? Yes, the fixtures can be great, but if the numbers behind that player is just not convincing, you know what? It doesn't matter what the fixtures are. It's just going to be, a disaster waiting to happen. And I think Arsenal fit that profile at the moment.
I'm sure they're going to improve, and I'm sure we're going to see a better Arsenal team going forward. I don't think we could see a worse Arsenal team, but whereas game week 4, I was targeting guys like Pepe, possibly Saka. I had all these plans to bring Arsenal players in. I had also had White on my bench, who was waiting for the game week 4 opportunity, and unfortunately, all of that's just out the window, and you have to adapt quickly, and you have to think, okay, Arsenal right now, until they prove me wrong. I can't consider them as fancy Premier League assets. Let me go with the teams that are in form and with the fixtures that I know that are turning for the right teams.
Yeah, exactly. And talking about that there, I may as well just brag about it, even though it's just been one game. But, I think Spurs have looked fairly organized defensively. They look much improved. And I brought in Dyer. He got in the 7 points, with the bonus at the end, which was quite nice. So, look, it's only one game, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is that, like you say, you need to adapt. And if you see something is not working, it's okay, make the change. And in this case, I was fortunate enough to see an immediate return. But, and looking at the numbers as well, Arsenal at the moment, the worst expected goals conceded with 8.36. It's shocking, really. And out of that, it's not like even they have a keeper who's being able to make saves. Out of that, it's a high expected goals conceded, and they've exceeded that by conceding 9. And when it comes to XG, they're sitting last as well. So it's an absolute nightmare there at the moment.
Yeah, and that's just terrible all around. I mean.
Yeah.
We knew their fixtures were tough, but that's a real.
I mean, they had Brentford as the first fixture, to put it into perspective. So even though they followed it up with two bad fixtures, but still, I mean, wow, that is absolutely shocking. I mean, I would have expected that to be at least halved, But looking at, you mentioned Manchester United's fixture turning soon. Yeah, it doesn't look great from game week 5 onwards. They've got West Ham, Villa, Everton, Leicester, Liverpool, Spurs, City taking us all the way to game week 11. And then they've got Watford in game week 12, but then they got Chelsea in game week 13. So, wow, that is quite the run over there. But to be honest, like, even if I have a Greenwood in my team at that moment, which I do now, I made some transfers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fairly confident that someone like Greenwood, I mean, his numbers look amazing. He has the best XG at the moment. And I feel like, yes, it's not the greatest run, but looking at some of those fixtures there, West Ham, look, I'm not even going to talk about Newcastle, right? I mean, that is captaincy material right there. But West Ham don't look the best defensively. Villa haven't looked the greatest. They're not bad, but they're not great. But they haven't kept a clean sheet so far, right? No, I think they kept one. But Everton, Leicester, not convincing. Liverpool, wow, I wouldn't be surprised to see a 0-0 there. So, but then you've got Spurs, City, and then Chelsea coming up in game week 13. I think it's the type of fixture run that, maybe from game week 9, 10, 11, 13, that might be the tough ones where I might consider moving my United attackers out of my team. But before that, I think I'm still willing to, up until game week 7 or 8, give them a run in my team.
Yeah, if you look at the fixture model, Newcastle is by far the best fixture there is in game week 4. So, I mean, right now you're not worried. I think Newcastle, West Ham, Villa, Everton, Leicester. Still good still, above average to very good fixtures in terms of attacking potential. So I wouldn't be worried up until game week 8. But game week 9 to 13, like you said, you've literally only got one good fixture out of 5, and that's the Watford away. And even Watford away, I don't think it's the best fixture around. So if I was, doing some long-term planning, I think that losing United players between game week 7 and 8 is definitely the way to go. And
just
as we spoke about,
the Chelsea fixtures,
just in time for it just happens to be the perfect time to rotate into Chelsea fixtures. So for me, I'm going to be, the other thing that worries me about Greenwood is that I think for now he's, I still feel that he's locked in the team. We're going to have to wait and see what happens. But when Rashford's back from injury, which could be a similar time to game week 7, game week 8, I think his minutes might start to be a bit questionable. So for me, I think his time is limited, which again is good timing because I only want him to perform for maybe 2-3 more weeks. But I certainly think that even if you're going Ronaldo from United, I think you've got to start. When we talk about rotating the premiums, I think you've got to take serious consideration into swapping out Ronaldo for Lukaku around that time. I was looking at some of Ronaldo's stats today, and last season for Juventus, he only scored 3 goals against top 6 opposition, whereas he scored something like 13 goals of his 28 or 29 goals against bottom 6 opposition. So Ronaldo's going to do extremely well in those soft fixtures, but I think against the top 6 teams, possibly going to struggle. And I think United in general struggle a bit to score goals against the top 6. So I think with those things combined, if you can look to rotate out from Ronaldo to Lukaku, that seems like a bit of a no-brainer rotation to me.
Yeah, and especially when you're having this type of difficult fixtures, the likelihood is that you're going to put the captaincy on someone else anyway, right? So yes, against Newcastle you can say, okay, Ronaldo is a perfect captaincy option, right? But then once the fixtures, especially that game week 9 to 13, the chances are is that you're going, let's look at, looking at Salah's fixtures, for example, game week 5, Crystal Palace. Look at the next 3, Leeds, Crystal Palace, Brentford. That is, that is quite the captaincy run there, okay? Then game week 7, Manchester City, not ideal, fine. But then Watford, game week 8, Liverpool have fairly decent record against Watford. And then it's Manchester United, game week 9, Brighton, game week 10, West Ham, game week 11. But if you look at there's realistically 5-6 fixtures that you can look at captaining Salah over there. But when it comes to United players, I think, I'm looking at these fixtures and it definitely doesn't look like captaincy material as well. So committing 12 million to one, or 12.5 to one player who you're not going to captain that much, and I think people might force captaincy onto him as a result, but doesn't look like the best move at the moment.
No, I think when you're going with a player that's 12 million plus, he has to be a captaincy option. And, like we spoke about from game week 7 onwards, I think Salah and Lukaku, if you're going for 2 premiums, are the must-haves because they rotate really nicely in terms of captaincy. And like you said, you're gonna have a guy who's costing you 12.5 million in Ronaldo in your team, and you're not going to be realistically. You shouldn't be captaining him against Liverpool, Spurs, City, Chelsea. Even statistically, if you look at his numbers, from previous seasons, he doesn't do well against the top 6. It doesn't make sense from a fixture perspective. It doesn't make sense from any point of view. And you're always going to get that variance, and he might do well in one of those games. But I think when we're planning, I would take Lukaku and Salah as a combination over Ronaldo and anyone else.
And I think people misconstrue this and take it as, especially the fanboys out there, they look at it and think, you're saying, Ronaldo is useless, he's not going to score. No, he might score a goal here or there. There's nothing to say that he won't go and score in every single one of those games. But if you're looking for, for somebody to accumulate points in that way, then you may as well go for like a Bamford or Calvert-Lewin, who can give you that type of low ceiling returns for much cheaper. But when you going that 10 million plus, then you want those high ceiling, you want those 12, 13, 14 point hauls where you're putting the captaincy on them and then they're getting you 28, 30 points a game, And
yeah, exactly.
I think that's where the difference comes in. It's not that they're not good players. It's not that they're not going to score or get some goals in between. It's just that the ceiling is probably just much more lower in these games. And looking at it at the moment, as much as it's so tempting, because I think it's more out of fear of missing out, or the fear that he'll go absolutely nuts and then you don't have him, that people want him in their squads. But at the moment, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking that for 12.5 million, it just doesn't seem like the right time. There's just not enough value here at the moment. Whereas if I look at from like game week 15 onwards, right? Well, I'll count game week 14 because it's Arsenal. But Arsenal, Crystal Palace, Norwich, Brentford, Brighton, Newcastle, Burnley, Wolves. That game week 14 to 21 is an amazing time if you want to have Ronaldo in your team.
Yeah, I agree. I think from game week 14, he looks like a fantastic asset. And if you can get him in game week 4 for the Newcastle fixture, and you're not going to take massive hits
or play a wild card,
then I think it makes sense. For sure to have him in for 3 or 4 games until you can rotate into Lukaku, but you've got to be a little bit careful here. The only counter argument to any of the stats that get thrown out there is, but he's Ronaldo, and everyone kind of gets it, but he's Ronaldo. He's gonna be amazing. But you look at last season's stats that he had in the Serie A, and he would have been the top in the Premier League. But you've got to remember that the Premier League is a much tougher league, and any player coming from any other league in Europe, you always have to discount their stats, and then you have to start looking. Even in the Serie A against the top 6, like I spoke about, he doesn't perform well. So I don't want a 6 fixture run where I'm playing the top 6 in 5 of the games. I mean, it's just going to be absolute suicide from an FPL perspective. And you just got to keep following the numbers and following the data and making the best decisions you can make with what's provided.
Yeah, and going back to what we were talking about earlier, is having someone like him in your team means sacrificing one other player in your team, which will most likely be an attacker, because defenders are so much cheaper that you can afford to have a full playing defense, and then you limit the scoring potential in your team because their ceiling is so much lower. But I think in the long run, it just doesn't make sense right now, I think. And that's, I suppose, yes, it may create a bit of a selection headache as well. But the good thing is that because we have so many premiums, we can target that, like, the game week 7 to game week 13 for Lukaku, and then the game week 14 and to game week 21 for Ronaldo, something like that, something along those lines. And people should embrace that as a positive thing over here, because it gives us more opportunities to maximize points and target certain fixtures and have better captaincy options and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I think rotation this year, I think, is going to be key, and that, like we spoke about, that premium planning is going to be really important. Realistically, I think, pick 2 of them, pick 2 premium players, and try and have a more balanced squad, because game week 3 was a great example of that. The guys that were very premium heavy all had very terrible game weeks.
Well, look at game week 2, where in my case I had Salah, Son and Bruno who all blanked. Yeah. And my scores were propped up ultimately by, if I'm looking over here, it was, I'm looking at, let me see. So Salah was my captain. He got 6 points. Son kept a clean sheet, so he had 3, and Fernandes had 1 because he got a yellow card. But my scores were actually propped up by the fact that I had Trent and Tsimikas, who both hit double digits, and then Rafinha, Antonio, and Ings all return. And I think that's a typical example of, you've got to spread out your team, because I think what the realization here, and I think most people listening to this need to understand that picking premiums is probably the easy part, because they will get you points at some point in time. But it's picking your supporting cast which ultimately make or break your team. Because if it was easy as just picking premiums, you know what? We see how high the ownership of premiums are every single season. But not everybody does well anyway. And it all comes down to the fact that people understand the value of having a good supporting cast.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if we look at game week 1, when Bruno scored a hat-trick and got massive points for everyone, and then I compare it to my game week 3 team, I scored 83 points in game week 3, and it was a massive green arrow for me. I think it was a game week rank of 47,000 odd. It was just huge for me, but the biggest points haul I had in my entire team was 11 points for Antonio. Our captain Son, he got 10 points with the captaincy, that's 20, but every single other player I had got a return other than Sanchez and Jimenez. So sometimes having that balance, you don't need these massive scores from your premium players. I had Wilson with 9, Mahrez with 4, Greenwood with 8, Salah with 10, Son with 10, Antonio with 11, Dyer with 7, Shaw with 6, and suddenly you've got like nine players that are all returning for you, and you've got a score that's 30 points above the average, and that's it's actually, I think, those game weeks when you really outperform the low scoring weeks is key to boosting your rank. If you can keep up during the high scoring weeks and then really show your worth during the low scoring weeks, that's when you start to make real moves.
That's a differentiator. And I'm looking at my scores here now as well. So first game week 100 points, second game week 71, and then game week 3 another 71 points. Now when I'm looking at my team here specifically as well, it's like game week 2 and game week 3, even though I scored 71 in both, but they were completely contrasting in how I got my points, where game week 2 was all about the supporting cast and game week 3 was all about premiums. And but when you have a balanced squad, the likelihood is that you don't need to rely on one or the other. And when they both fire in the same week, then you can have those 100 point or 90 point game weeks, which are amazing. But the aim is for consistency. And I think that's why I'm so reluctant to play my wildcard at the moment, because I have a team which I feel is good enough to be consistent on a week by week basis, rather than just targeting one high game week and then one low game week.
Yeah, the concern for me, someone who's not going to wildcard this week, barring some crazy injury news, is that Newcastle is the real fixture that you want Ronaldo for. And now if you don't have him, and then you've got West Ham away, Villa at home. I mean, West Ham away is an okay fixture. Villa at home is a good fixture. And then you start, and suddenly you're at game week 7, and now you want to start bringing Lukaku in, who's got the most amazing fixtures. So do I want to reshuffle? Yeah, so I think that's the key is going to be the balance, and like I said, bringing Ronaldo in, you want to bring him in for that Newcastle fixture, because it's just such a good fixture for United. But if you don't have the ability to bring him in for game week 4, then it starts to become a bit iffy, because he's got an okay fixture against West Ham and then a good fixture against Villa. And then suddenly you're at game week 7 where you want to bring Lukaku in. So do I really want to completely kill the balance of our team for 2 sort of average fixtures? Not really. So unless you can bring him in for the Newcastle fixture, I think, I'm certainly from my point of view, I'm going to be holding off on Ronaldo probably all the way till that United fixture swing again in game week 14.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I think there's enough value to be had elsewhere to not be knee-jerk about it and just get it just because it's Ronaldo, like you said. I think looking at the fixtures as well, I think Spurs have better fixtures. So I mean, realistically, you could go for Kane or Kane or Son, and in the meantime. And then we have Salah in our teams as well, and then Lukaku from game week 7. So yeah, I think the more I look at it and the more sometimes we have this habit of trying to talk ourselves into certain decisions. but I looked at it and it's the same goes for someone like the other player that I've been talking myself in and out of getting is Torres. Now, for the same reasons that I didn't pick Riyad Mahrez on day one in my team is the reason why I'm not going for Torres as well, where even at 7 million I feel that there's enough. Look, anybody's going for him. I actually don't I wouldn't say it's a bad thing necessarily, because at 7 million it's low risk, but I just feel if you're gonna go like 0.5 0.6 up to a Jota or Greenwood in that same bracket, or even now with Rafinha in the fixture swing as well, there's enough other options to not have to tie yourself into going with such a risky option like Torres.
It's so frustrating because all you want to do is pick some of these City players who have these amazing stats. But you know what the problem is at the start of every single game week, you're just waiting for that team news to come out, and then you see your players on the bench, and you know what, you have that the reason you don't want to put Torres in your side is because you just know that if you do it, he's going to be benched the next game week. It's just like this inevitable thing that is just going to absolutely kill you.
I'd absolutely lose it, and I think that's why I went for Son over Mahrez early season, as you know, in the opening weeks of the season, because look, Son is guaranteed to play, which means he has a higher likelihood of scoring, and he's got 2 double-digit hauls. Now, yes, I can talk about not having the balance of my team being off, but it's such a relief knowing that your players are fairly nailed and you don't need to worry about rotation risk. And even at the moment, like when we're talking about something like Ronaldo, again, we just don't know. Yes, he will play, I mean, but at the end of it all, does that rule out Cavani? Of course not. I mean, he'll definitely have to play as well.
Yeah, I think. Oh, excuse me, my microphone there. I think a guy like Cavani, I think he's going to be sort of relegated to a super sub role for this season now that Ronaldo's come through. I don't see him doing anything much more. I think last season he only got about 13 appearances. So I think he's firmly as a super sub now. I think Ronaldo's going to obviously want to play as much as possible. But back to those City assets. Like you said, at 7 million, Torres, you almost feel, like you have to take a gamble on a guy who's, City are just scoring so many goals. They've
Especially
scored 10
players with such high ceilings.
Yeah, they've scored 10 goals in the last 2 games, but the only problem is that it's very spread around, and here's a very interesting stat for you. Torres at the moment has an XG of 1.62 and an expected assists of 0.19. He's outperformed that by 150%, just based pretty much on game week 3. But interestingly enough, Mahrez, who has half the minutes. He's only got 123 minutes, whereas Torres has 240 so far. Mahrez actually has an expected points that is higher than Torres. Mahrez has an XG of 1.14 and an expected assist of 1.26. Now, his conversion rate is only at 84%, and this is where you start to see this massive variance, because a guy who's sort of outperforming his expected data by 1.5 versus a guy who's slightly under his expected data. The guy who's only got 120 minutes should have scored more points. Now you're thinking, or my thinking certainly is that Mahrez has been benched for 2 games. Surely now this Pep roulette, surely Pep's not words. Surely Pep's not going to bench him again.
No.
Mahrez has never been benched for more than 2 games in a row. So that's just head games, and I can't realistically I can't wait to get rid of the City assets.
About Pep's selection, especially last season, is that it's almost like, I remember Riyad Mahrez started the season last season as well, and then it's almost like he went cold and he never started for a while, or he played like 30 minutes or whatever it is, and then Foden came in, it almost was like in fashion, And then Foden all of a sudden went to like 3, 4, 5, 6 games where he hardly played. And then it's so even that as well, where to say, I think there's a few players like Kevin De Bruyne or whatever you can kind of take a chance on. But the rest of them, they're all fair game. And talking about City assets, I mean, in the top 10 itself, right, if we're looking at expected goal involvement, Riyad Mahrez is number 1. He's got an XGI, so expected goal involvement of 2.4. And then in 5th, we've got Torres at 1.8. 6th and 7th is also City players, Grealish and Sterling. And if you go a little bit more down, just outside the top 10 is Gundogan. But yeah, looking at those type of numbers, yes, they're all fine and good. But it's a type of headache that I just don't feel that I need. And with so many options in the game, I also don't see it as necessary as well.
Yeah, my advice, or certainly what I'm going to do, is try and get rid of that headache. Like I said, short term, I think Mahrez has got another 2 game weeks for me. I'm just going to take that punt because even at the moment with him playing, 30 minutes, he seems to be coming on at worst at the 60-minute mark. With him playing 30 minutes, just from the strength of the City side, he's getting enough opportunities for me to not warrant just taking a -4 to get him out. But he's definitely in my plans to get rid of, and I think his time will shortly be up. And I think going for those nailed on starters with the stats behind them, you just don't have those headaches, and you don't question your decisions. If you bring a City player in now, even a guy like Gundogan has really been sort of at the back of my mind, because last season he was he had fantastic stats. This season his stats aren't bad.
And if you look at
and
the
he's getting the
positions
minutes
he was taking up against Arsenal as well, a lot of he was getting into the box quite frequently. I mean,
yeah, he was very advanced. And again, like, he could be that guy that's just at 7.5 million, or I think he's down to 7.3 or something now. He could just be the guy that you've got a banker guy who's going to play probably the most minutes out of the City players. Maybe he's worth putting in, but do you want the headaches of I think that becomes a little bit easier when you've got a stronger bench later in the season, because then if he doesn't play, someone else can come in from the bench. But you definitely don't want a situation where a guy like Gundogan comes on for 10, 15 minutes in a game, because then you don't even get to use your bench player. And it's just
you're fortunate enough, like with Riyad Mahrez, who scored in Gameweek 2.
Yeah.
But it's just not worth it, because it's too much of a chance.
It's just headaches, and it's very, very difficult. So I think with the Pep roulette, it's going to be very difficult. I think there are going to be a lot of people that take punts, and I think taking punts, it's not incorrect. Like I said, with Mahrez only playing 20 minutes or 30 minutes in the last 2 games, his stats are still way up there. And it's not necessarily a bad decision. Mahrez has got a goal and assist in 2 games that he came off the bench. So it's not the end of the world, but you're missing out on the extra point for playing, you're missing out on the bonus points, you're missing out on the clean sheet points. And in FPL, that actually starts adding up quite a bit.
Yeah, look, I must say, where the issue comes in for somebody like Mahrez is that if he was, let's say, 0.5 or 2 million cheaper, I think at 7.5 you could afford to just throw him into your team and hope that he plays, because he has such a high ceiling, and those numbers are amazing. But at 9.5 also, it then becomes restrictive, because you're realistically taking out, like, say, 2 million out of your team, where you can put that money elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's where, you could go 0.5 upwards and get Son, and then that he's guaranteed to play every minute. So I think that's where the issue comes in for me, is that there are certain gambles that are worth taking depending on the price, depending on the value of the player. But yeah, when you're talking about 9.5, you're not talking about punt territory anymore.
I think that's where Torres becomes quite a juicy punt, because it's 7.1 million now.
Yeah, you can afford to cover him on your bench with somebody on your bench as well.
You can afford to take the punt, and even if he gets half an hour, it's not the end of the world. It's a little bit like Jota as well.
Yeah.
We're going to have to see what happens with Firmino's injury, but if he's nailed on, he becomes a much juicier option.
You see, where I think the comparisons between like Jota and Torres stop is that the way I see it, Jota is actually the first choice now, and Firmino and Mane are going to be rotated between, you'll either see a situation where Jota plays on the left or in the middle rather than Mane or Firmino. And also, I think that Jota probably starts maybe 4 out of 5 games, whereas we just can't say that with Torres.
Yeah, I'm sort of not as convinced with Jota just yet. For me, I think the rotation is still going to be with him and Firmino. I think they're going to sort of play 60 minutes and half an hour as sort of like as a combination. I think Jota's definitely seems to be higher in the pecking order. He started the games, I think 2 of the games so far. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens there. But again, even with Jota, who his stats are just through the roof. I mean, when you start looking at expected stats when it comes to Jota,
yeah, I'm just
he's
looking
in the
right
top.
now.
I think he's in the top 3 in every season and even now his stats are very good. But you've just got to be, those extra minutes make a huge difference, and everyone should have Salah in their team. He is, for me, the number one. He's the first guy in my team in
he's
fantasy.
the king of FPL.
He is the king of FPL points. He was first last season. I think he's ranked 6th on my rankings at the moment. You just don't want to not have him. He's on penalties. He's going to get you those points. He's the premium. And so now, I go back to like I have this aversion to doubling up. So I'm not as convinced on Jota as well. I've had a few drafts where, I've sort of thought about bringing him in, and, it involves a little bit of shuffling to do so, but he's going to be a guy that you're also just not going to be convinced every week when your team is submitted and you click that save button at the end of the week.
You're just hoping
you're
that he starts.
You're going to hope that he starts. You're going to hope that he plays 90 minutes, and it's not going to happen. He's always going to be the 60-minute, 30-minute type of player, and it's going to be frustrating as hell, and that's tough. And it also affects, like we spoke about when we spoke about bonus points. It affects that massively. You'll see that those guys that are playing way fewer minutes are gonna really suffer when it comes to collecting bonus points, and that's why I say the strategy that really served me well last season was trying to select the best player from each team that I could, and Salah is the best player from Liverpool. If you can fill up your rest of your squad with best players from the top teams fixture wise, and you can fill up that squad without having to start looking at sort of seconds, in the guys like Jota and Torres, etc. Then I think you're gonna find that you're gonna score more points, because you're gonna get the guys who get the 3 bonus points. You're gonna get the guys who get 90 minutes. And sure, if you run into budget issues and for the balance of your squad, you need to start taking a punt on Jota or Torres or one of those guys, then it does make sense. But ideally, what you want to do is to try and avoid that.
Yeah, look, I fully agree with that, because even looking at the way my team is set up at the moment, I think I've also followed a similar type of approach. I haven't doubled up, except for Alexander-Arnold and Tsimikas, which is a different situation because of the fact that Tsimikas has acted as an enabler. And the fixtures were so good, I suppose. But right now, even that will change. It's not like I'm going to go and get Andy Robertson to come in and double up on 2 expensive Liverpool defenders. But again, I think I agree with the strategy of keeping single players from each, in terms of separating defense and attack, and only having one attacking player, one defensive player. I might make the exception for the likes of a Greenwood or Jota because of the attractive price point. But the one thing I've noticed with a lot of wildcard drafts that I'm seeing on social media as well is that in order to try and maximize the price points and get a full playing squad so that they can fit in Salah and Ronaldo. There's a lot of doubling up going on. So I've seen drafts like, there's one draft I saw specifically where they have Salah and Ronaldo as the two premiums, but then they've got Jota and Greenwood in that same team, and they've got Antonio and Benrahma in that same team. And I'm thinking, but hold on now, you've got 6 players from 3 teams, right? Which means that you're ultimately relying on those 3 teams to fire and win every single week. And I think that's a very risky strategy, because you look at the situation where, like, and it's so hard to fix a team when you're going through now. We spoke about United's run between game weeks 9 and 13. Now you have to, it's almost like a transfer booked, waiting to happen, because you have no choice but to rectify that, or else you're going to be going into that type of block of fixtures, is probably tripling up on one team's players. And I just feel like, look, I've done it in the past, and I think I've learned my lesson from that as well, where I'd go in with like 3 Liverpool, 3 City, and it worked to a certain extent because those teams were doing well in previous seasons. So you didn't need to worry about it too much, right? But I just think that there's a better way of being able to maximize all the fixtures. And a typical example would be this past week. After the Saturday fixtures, my score looked horrible, but I was one of the few players I remember in my leagues. I don't know if you use FPL Gameweek, sometimes to look at the live mini leagues as it's updating. But I remember when I saw the number of players remaining. I had 9 players remaining, and some people only had 3 players, and they were sitting on like 22 points, and that gave me enough confidence going into the Saturday fixtures. And then just from the Spurs fixture alone, I ended up getting the Spurs Watford fixture. I got 20 points from Son because I captained him. I got 7 from Dyer, and then I was fortunate enough to get 7 saves out of Bachmann, and he got 4 points as well. So you're talking about 31 points just from one fixture alone. But I wouldn't have been in that position to do that if I say I doubled on Manchester United assets and Liverpool players and West Ham players as well. And I think that's where the benefit of spreading out your players comes in.
Yeah, I agree. I think I've seen the same on Twitter, and I've seen a lot of teams exactly like you said, where they've got sort of these huge double ups with Antonio, Benrahma, Greenwood, Ronaldo, Salah, Jota. And
that's just not even including the defenders. So when you include them, there's chances that they have like Trent and Shaw in their defense. So they're tripling up on 2 teams. And it just doesn't look right. It looks like, you're putting all your eggs in one basket, and it just doesn't make sense.
The problem is that it's a mess. There's massive recency bias with that, because in the short term it works phenomenally well. You will look like an absolute legend for 3 or 4 weeks. But the problem is, like, when we spoke about fixtures turning, United's fixtures coming off, you get these patches where even if it's just like City playing Liverpool, suddenly in one game you've got 6 players that are all playing each other. There's just no spots for anyone to get any returns out of that. And what tends to happen is you remember the fact that, I had this brilliant team and I scored all these points. But it's not a long-term thinking, and over a period of 10 game weeks, it's going to be diabolical for you, because when you suddenly have to get rid of 3 Man United players, 3, let's say, City players at a certain point, or 3, whoever it is, 3 Spurs players, Spurs fixtures also have turning points, and suddenly when you have to rotate these players out, you just don't have enough transfers to do it. And you're going to be stuck with a situation where suddenly you're going to be wishing you had a wild card available, or taking massive hits, taking 8-point hits just to fix your team, and over that 10-week period you're just going to absolutely hemorrhage points just from all those double ups that you started with.
And exactly, and looking, the one team that's a good case study for this specifically is Villa. At the beginning of the season, everybody looked at the first 3 fixtures of Watford, Newcastle, Brentford, and I don't blame them, because, man, those look like good fixtures on paper, right? And I saw a lot of doubling up with Watkins and Buendia Ings and Buendia, and then they'll go one step further and have like Target or Mings in the defense, or Emi Martinez or whatever. Now, if you look at their results, they've got 3-2 against Watford, which they lost. They've got 2-0 against Newcastle, which is fine, and then 1-1 with Brentford. And Ings, fine, he was a relative banker during that run. But I mean, you look at the rest of it, I mean, it doesn't look right. It just didn't work out.
It doesn't work because now also you're in game week 4 and suddenly you've got 3 players that are playing Chelsea away.
And there's a massive fixture swing.
Yeah, you've got Chelsea away, Everton, United, Spurs in the next 4. You've got 3 players that you have to get rid of. And realistically, if you just said, I want the best player from Aston Villa, you would have gone Danny Ings, thank you very much. You would have got actually the most points that you needed out of just the one player. And you wouldn't have all the headaches. It's an easy thing to fix when it comes to game week 4. You can rotate Ings out and bring someone like Jimenez in, and it's just problem solved. Whereas when you've got these triple ups and double ups, it's just an absolute nightmare to maintain your team over time.
Exactly. And I think, look, I suppose with someone like Jota or so on, like I said, I may make an exception for him because the price point is so good, and I do know that if he plays, he'll most likely get you points anyway. If Firmino, well, we know that Firmino is going to be injured for a while now, and that's fine. But I think to do it for more than one team, I think that's when it starts to get a bit excessive.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna do it, I think make it as a one team absolute maximum. So I agree. A guy like Jota is definitely an option, one that I've certainly thought long and hard about. I don't think that's a bad option at all, but then make sure that you don't have any other double ups from an attacking point of view only, for sure. Because you are going to get those situations where your team's just going to be in disarray at some point.
And I think also it depends on the fixtures for me. Like, the good thing about Liverpool's fixtures, I mean, even if you look at the whole fixtures from now till the ending of the season, if you look at between game week 7 and 11, we've got City coming up in game week 7, United in game week 9, and that's about it. Well, we've got West Ham in game week 11, which the official side rates as a 4, which is absolutely ridiculous. But anyway, let's just ignore that one. But even the hard fixtures are kind of spread out. It's not like a block of fixtures like you're looking at United's between game week 9 and 13.
Yeah.
So
I think there are 2 teams that are pretty fixture proof throughout the season. I think that's Liverpool and City. If you scroll through their fixtures, they're never any. There's 1 or 2 bad games splattered around, but they generally there are no blocks of bad fixtures, where that certainly can't be said for any other team. United have these a couple blocks as the season goes on where they've got very, very, very good fixtures and very bad fixtures blocks. So again, like that's where Jota's selection becomes a little bit more appealing, because you're not gonna run into that fixture block situation. But with United, I think you definitely will. I think with Chelsea, even you're gonna have these blocks where they're going to be bad fixtures. And with the other teams, it just gets worse and worse as you sort of plan those fixtures.
Yeah, definitely. So, it's good that you mentioned that, because it just shows that it's never just one or the other. It's not black and white. I think there's mitigating circumstances for every decision. You can justify certain things, but there's a certain depth to it, like looking at fixtures and so on. And so you can double up on players at times, but what I'm noticing so far is definitely being able to have players involved in various fixtures is really, really helping me manage my squad this season.
Yeah, and I think a key one to talk about actually as well is that there's really good fixtures for the Wolves guys from game week 4, I think, to 14. And I think that in terms of attacking options, you've obviously got Jimenez and Traore, and then in terms of a defender or even the goalkeeper, I think having maybe one Wolves attacker and one Wolves defender from from game week 4 to 14 is an excellent option.
Yeah.
And there's some good ones. I think Semedo and Sace, or Romain Sace for me is for sure the guy that I want to bring in. But yeah, you've got good options there.
Yeah, I'm going to be upfront and say I've made my 2 free transfers that I've been banging on about since last week. I wasn't so sure initially if I've made the right decision, but the more I think about it, the more I think that's fine. I think I'm comfortable with it. So Ings out, Jimenez in, and Bruno out, Greenwood in. So I think now I'm sitting with 5 million burning a hole in my pocket over here in the bank. But I might just consider taking a -4 closer to the ending of the international break, closer to the deadline. If I can, and either look at moving one of, I've got Gilmore and Scarlett as my 2 bench fodder options. But just looking at those 2, I'm thinking, okay, I could either wait 1 more week and bring in Bamford for game week 5 onwards, but then that will mean that I'll want to take Rafinha out of my team.
Yeah, and, I think that's Leeds are also in a sort of difficult situation where I think their fixtures turn quite nicely from game week 5, and I've also considered having both Rafinha and Bamford, but I think picking one is probably better. And I think Bamford for me is the number 1 choice. I think his stats have been excellent even in the first three game weeks. But it comes down to the balance of your team. You know, if I was wildcarding, I would for sure bring Bamford in. But based on the team that I have now, I'm going to have to go the Rafinha route, just because the midfield is where I need to make changes. I need to get rid of the Mahrez. I need to get rid of Son. When Son I think has Chelsea, where Spurs have Chelsea at home in game week 5, and for me that's enough reason for me to look at rotating out to free up some funds for Lukaku, who's going to sort of come in game week 7.
Yeah.
So try and rotate those players out, or have those plans to rotate out on the bad fixtures. You know, for me, it's going to be Son when they're playing Chelsea, and then when City play Chelsea in game week 6, it's the same thing. Mahrez is going to go. So, you know, at the moment, I'm using that Chelsea defense to sort of time the getting rid of my attackers, just because the Chelsea defense is so good.
Yeah, look, it definitely, and the one thing I'm looking at as well, like I say, you know, I've been complaining about the balance of my team. So at the moment, it's sitting at a 4-4-2. But because I have that 5 million sitting in the bank, I can easily move a striker or a midfielder to be able to move to a 3-4-3 or 3-5-2. So I've got, it gives me options, but looking at my team, I think like the only player in my whole team that has a bad fixture or difficult fixture is Rafinha. The rest of them, they look absolutely amazing. But so it gives me enough confidence to say, okay, even if I decide not to take that hit, I can go 1 more week, wait, and then just say, okay, the Liverpool fixture is done for Leeds, and then possibly use my free transfer to make that next attacking transfer. And I could consider one of 2 things: either just making the transfer, like moving Scarlett to Bamford, and then holding on to Rafinha for 1 more week, where I'll need to double up on Leeds. And who do Leeds play in game week 5? Let me just have a look. It's Newcastle, so that's not a bad one to hold 2 Leeds players for.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. You know, again, if it's a short-term plan, while you're rotating players, sometimes you're going to have these double ups that aren't necessarily long-term plans. But that's fine. And having Rafinha and Bamford for a Newcastle fixture is going to be great. But like you said, you've got that plan to rotate Rafinha into someone else, or move into that, back to that sort of template of having 1 star player from each team.
Yes, and look, I don't want to say I'll actually do that, because chances are, you know, maybe I'll decide to make another transfer and go the 3-5-2 option. But that's definitely one that I'm looking at. But the way I'm looking at it at the moment is that unless something drastic happens, you know, I might decide, okay, no, like I said, maybe I might take a hit to go with one more player, but it just doesn't feel like something I really want to do, or something that's necessary to be taking a hit to getting that one more player. And and apart from that as well, like I said, there's over the next few weeks, things will change so much that I feel like I don't want to be too reactionary as well. I can afford one more week just carrying an extra defender. And anyway, looking at the defenders, Trent, Shaw, Dyer, Falkman, I mean, you're talking about Leeds, Newcastle, Crystal Palace, and Brentford. I think if there's any type of fixtures you want to carry for defenders, you may as well do it for this lot.
Yeah, that's the one. Those are really good fixtures.
So
I think the key to deciding whether you want to take a hit is whether you're bringing in a player that you're going to captain. If you're going to take a hit to bring in someone that you're going to captain, then it makes a lot more sense, because you can make up those 4 points a lot easier. If you're just doing it for a regular player, it's going to be very difficult for that to be a positive return.
And I can tell you right now that any of the players that I'm looking at bringing in, either a midfielder or a forward, I'm not captaining that player because it'll be somebody around not that I'm looking at the price specifically, but both Scarlett and Gilmore are 4.5, which means that the max I can pay for any player is 9.5, and nobody underneath that price is worth captaining during game week 4 anyway.
No, you're going to be captaining in premiums this season. I think that's definitely going to be the season of premiums.
Yeah, so based on that over there as well, it just makes no logical sense for me to do that one extra transfer. But like I said, we're recording today on Thursday, so but so much can change within a week or so. Maybe there's an injury or somewhere, something like that happens, and we decide, okay, fine, pull the trigger on one more transfer. But
exactly.
So I'll just need to decide whether it's worth just persisting for one more week with the 4-4-2.
Yeah, exactly. These injuries they're going to change everything. My team's also hinging on whether players are fit, whether players get banned by FIFA. There's so much that's going to happen between now and actually even the start of game week 4. So
who knows, we might even end up wildcarding next week, Thursday or Friday.
I hope not. I really hope not. But it's possible. It's certainly very possible. It's a long time. The international breaks. That's what makes the international breaks so tough, and why I was hoping to have two free transfers for this period. But unfortunately, you've got to just go with the cards you dealt. And unfortunately, I had a Watkins injury that didn't come back in time.
Yeah, those happened.
I had White that was just an absolute big mistake from the start of the season.
I'm going to also put my hands up there and say, listen, you know what? That was one that I kind of regret doing, but anyway, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's tough, and you're gonna have these things that are gonna pop up, and you're gonna have to fix, and plans change, and then you've just got to adapt and try and make the most solid decision you can.
The one that I definitely kind of look at and I think like, why is Bachmann, where he's got 1 point and 1 point in the first 2 games, then he got 4 points because he made 7 saves against Spurs.
Yeah.
So in total, he's got 6 points over 3 games. But the good news is that his fixtures are, well, he got Wolves up next, but then Norwich, Newcastle. So it leads. It gets a little bit better, but if I was wildcarding, I'd probably change him. I'd probably switch him.
Yeah, if I was wildcarding, interestingly enough, I think I would. Schmeichel would maybe be the keeper that I'd be looking for from Leicester. They've got pretty good fixtures coming up, and I think this season he seems like the Martinez almost of last season. He seems to be the best keeper around at 5 million.
Yeah. So I actually thought it would be more for some reason.
I think he's well priced, and you can't really get a Leicester defender at the moment. There are no clear sort of options from the Leicester side.
That's right, because of the injuries and all of that.
Yeah, so I think if I was wildcarding, that would be my keeper option for sure.
And I'm looking at their fixtures. Okay, they've got City up next in game week 4, but then after they've got Brighton, Burnley, Palace, then they've got United in game week 8, but then Brentford, Arsenal, Leeds. That's actually a very, very good run. And even if you look at actually their fixtures from game week 4 right the way up until game week 16, they've actually got they've just got City in game week 4, Manchester United in game week 8, and then Chelsea in game week 12. And then in
And
between,
that's it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that's about it. It looks absolutely amazing. To be honest, like Leicester always seem to carry these, these overpriced players. But looking at this, I must say, wow, you've given me something to think about. If I do ever wildcard sometime soon,
Yeah, I think
he'd be
he's
on
the
my
keeper
list.
option for
Yeah.
me. I think also to remember, I think Brighton's fixtures get quite considerably worse. So Brighton start to get tough from game week 9. They've got City, Liverpool, and they just don't look. They haven't looked as good as I was hoping they would look. I think it's largely
Brighton
due
have
to the
been a
injuries.
huge disappointment
Yeah.
for me as well.
Yeah. So I think when it comes to if you're wildcarding, I think Schmeichel would be my number one option. And if you were going a 4.5 option, then I think you could stick with Sanchez
Or
look at Brentford's defense actually doesn't look too bad. But again, you worry about they've got some bad fixtures as well coming up.
I think Brentford had it a bit. Wow, I'm gonna call Arsenal an easy fixture, yeah. But then they had Palace, which was an unknown quantity, and then Villa, who just don't seem to be a cohesive unit at the moment. But I think it will get worse now. They've got Brighton up next, who we just don't know which version of them will pitch up, and then Wolves, and then after that, wow, Liverpool, United.
West Ham.
It's West Ham, yes, Chelsea, and then Leicester. Yeah, it's like I think maybe that early season flutter might be a little bit deceiving over there. So because
exactly.
And that's another thing. Like I've seen so many people knee-jerk. They're looking at players like Pontus Janssen from Brentford, and who else? Shane Duffy at 4.2. They're looking at these guys as enablers, almost like they're expecting them to play so that they can free up money to get in extra premiums, and that is a very, very dangerous tactic to use.
Yeah, a lot of these guys have very limited minutes in their futures, and that's where it's going to be difficult, because you want these enablers to be able to bring in the premiums, but you also want to make sure you've got guys that are playing.
Yeah, it's effectively you're effectively booking a transfer. It's like us with Tsimikas. We knew it was a short-term gain, but now we're sitting in a situation where you've got a defender who's not going to play, and now he has to, and then even worse is that if you want a third Liverpool option, which most of us do, then now you're looking at Tsimikas having to move on first, and it's a transfer booked again.
And it's very difficult. It's very difficult when your budget's tight to get rid of a 4 million defender.
Yes.
Which you have to upgrade to replace. It makes it very, very difficult.
No, sure, definitely. So I think that as well seems very short-sighted to be getting the players like Livramento is a different story, because he plays for Southampton. He's 4.1, 4.2, whatever. You can always just put him as the last player on the bench. But I think once you start relying on if you're relying on a player like Shane Duffy being your first change on the bench, I think that's a very dangerous move. I think at the minimum you want a 4.5 million playing defender at least as your one guaranteed sub.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So look, whoa, what a show. We essentially did a game week 1 to game week 3 mega review. We've spoken about the wild card, but I think that was a jam-packed show over there. So I'm just I'm kind of embracing this break, and especially now that we're recording a podcast, to get content out so quickly weekly is quite a challenge, so it's nice to have a little bit of a breather, but also to be able to take stock of what's gone on over the last 3 weeks. And I think that's helped me to gain some clarity of, especially on the whole wildcard debate, of definitely I'm not playing it. I think that I can almost guarantee, unless something drastic happens.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat. Let's see what happens. We've still got more than a week to go until game week 4 starts. But it's going to be interesting. Let's hopefully there are no major injuries, and though for those people that are wildcarding, take it all into account. I think if you can delay that wildcard, certainly try and do it. If you're going to wild card and bring Ronaldo in, make sure you're captaining him. And
don't just play your wild card just to bring in Ronaldo.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It could be a very short-sighted move. Let's see how he adapts to the league.
Wow. I didn't think I'd hear that. No, I think adaptation I think would be fine, but I think it's just a case of more, there's just enough value out there. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, cheers, Greg. Catch you next week.
Thanks, Clyde. See you again soon.